If you want to get better at learning music, you have to learn how the brain works, how to use it, and how to improve it. Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be, regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to episode number 119. My name is David Lane and it is great to be with you once again. First, just a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. I hope that this episode has a good sound to it, that there's not too much distracting in the background. We have tree work going on across the street, and I see it picking up on the microphone, but hopefully it's low enough that I can cut it out and that you won't hear that in the final mix. But just in case you do, if you hear a little rumbling in the background, I apologize for that. Hopefully it is, at the very worst, not much of a distraction. So we're back to one of my favorite topics today, which is about the art of practice, the craft of practice, how to get better at learning music more efficiently. And I think it's important that we do a closer focus at something that I've said before, and that it's all about the brain. It is not about your body doing things on its own, your fingers going to the right place, your arms making the right movements all by themselves. They're all controlled by this wonderful muscle in the top of your head called the brain. And if you understand how the brain works as well as you can practice as well as you can. So let's jump in. There are three parts of the brain, and one of them is not really that important, but I'll mention it. But there are two that are important, and those are the conscious and the subconscious. And then the third one is the unconscious. So I'll go ahead and mention that one first. The unconscious part of your brain, again, this is assuming that you didn't cover this in science in middle school or high school, or if it's been a while and you forgot. The unconscious part of your brain is what controls the things that you never think about and are probably glad that you don't have to think about, like remembering to breathe, remembering to blink, remembering for your heart to keep beating. These are all controlled by your brain, but it's a part that is not influenced by how much you are thinking about it. Although certainly there are some things that you can do consciously that might cause the heart to go a little faster, or you can, through some conscious efforts, sometimes lower your heart rate, so it's not entirely divorced from your other parts of your brain, but for the most part, if you don't think about it, it'll do what it does on its own just fine. So then you have the conscious part of your brain. These are the things that you do with full awareness or close to full awareness, with things that you are paying attention to that you do. So whenever you're learning something new, for example, there's a lot of conscious activity going on. So when something is new, when something is maybe not even new but not quite familiar, you're going to have the conscious brain work. A really good example that I'm also going to compare with the subconscious is when you're traveling to a destination for the first time. It could be a new job, it could be a restaurant you've never been to, but especially if it's in a city that you've never been to before. You're very aware of, let me make sure I don't miss my turn, let me pay attention to what's going on. This is the conscious brain at work. But if you're going to that restaurant for the 50th time, or that job, and this city is one that you've been in years, you probably have some subconscious activity going on, which means you could probably carry on a conversation. You could barely pay attention to what's going on, and you'll still get there on time. You'll get there safely. So the subconscious part of your brain is where your brain has created neurological shortcuts, things that your conscious brain has observed that you do quite a bit. In computer terms, this would be called cookies. If you go to a website quite a bit, it loads up faster because it stores a lot of information that you've done before. And if I don't quite have that right, I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not a computer programmer, so give me a little grace if you are one of those people. The subconscious allows you to do the things that you do the most, especially the things that you do the most a certain way, without having to think about how to do it. So a really good example of that is walking. I use this example quite a bit. Watch any toddler learning to walk, and you will see them in full concentration mode. This is the conscious brain on full alert, getting used to standing up and then standing on one leg while the other hip swings around, and you shift the weight to your other leg and you shift your balance, and you're able to balance on that leg while you then repeat the process of swinging that first leg around and then continuing and continuing. And there's a lot of conscious activity. You're very focused on how that feels, how that looks. If something doesn't go right, you try to correct it and try to repeat it successfully. And then before you know it, you're just walking. You're at point A, you want to go to point B. Your legs just seem to move on their own. There's things that happen with the arms in terms of swinging that create a natural gait. There's so many things going on when you walk. And we know that walking is not an easy thing because it's something that people have to relearn all the time, especially if they've been in bed for a significant amount of time. The body will forget if you don't do it often. But if you're healthy and you've been walking, you just get up and walk. But your body doesn't do it on its own. The subconscious brain is doing the work for you. A good example of the conscious and subconscious side by side is reading a book. When the book is new, you are engaged consciously to figure out what the book is saying. But if you've read a lot of books before, especially in the language that you're reading this book in, so let's just say, for example, English, you're very comfortable with the English language, but this book is new. The conscious part is focused on the newness of the book, but the subconscious is recognizing all the letters. It's putting those letters into words, especially the ones that you've seen a lot, and it's quickly telling you the definition, and you see those words together in groups, and you're getting a context, and you're very rapidly figuring out what all of those words mean so that you can focus on what is the book saying. You don't have to figure out what letter is this, put those letters together, what word is this, what does that word mean? No, because you've spent a lot of time with it, your subconscious is doing that for you, which is what makes it possible to enjoy a book. You would not enjoy it if you did not have the subconscious helping, if you had to consciously figure out every single bit of the process. So the ultimate goal of any musician is to push a technical skill or a piece of repertoire from the conscious to the subconscious. That's important enough that I will repeat it. The ultimate goal for any musician is to take any technical skill or piece of repertoire and push it from the conscious to the subconscious part of your brain. So a really important question to ask is, how do we do that? How do we get something from the conscious to the subconscious? First of all, you need to know you don't get anything to the subconscious without it going through the conscious first. It's like you don't get filtered water unless that water goes through the filter itself. If you could figure out how to get something to your subconscious without going to the conscious first, you would have probably a multi-billion-dollar item on your hand. You would have multi-billion-dollar knowledge. So I think the best you're probably going to be able to do is figure out how to get it there as fast as you can. This is what computers do well. They take new information, but they process it so quickly that it's hard to see the difference in time. But there is a measurable difference in time. So here are some things that you can do to get anything that you're practicing from the conscious to the subconscious. Again, this can be a scale, Could be chord progressions, could be arpeggios, it could be a piece of music. You know that you've gotten to the subconscious when you don't really think very hard about it. You might not even think about it at all. It just seems like your hands know what to do, or if you're singing, your voice knows exactly what to do. So the first thing you need to do is you need to have intense concentration, intense focus while you are in the conscious phase of practice. Now, if you've listened to several podcast episodes already, you know what I'm going to say here. You have 3 senses at work when you play. You have your sight, your sound, and your sense of touch. You need to focus on them one at a time, as intensely as you can. Really pay attention to what it looks like when you're learning it. And get your eyes off the sheet music. I don't mean what does it look like those notes on the page. I'm talking about what does it look like when your hands play your instrument. And then close your eyes. What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Ask those questions one at a time. And having done so, you will make the fastest possible strides toward getting the subconscious engaged. Because it's when those senses are being engaged that the subconscious is more likely to take over sooner. When you're not paying attention to what things look like, sound like, and feel like, you don't get there that fast. So something else that you need to do, and this can be easier said than done for a lot of you, and that is to turn off distractions. You cannot learn a piece of music well if you're trying to pay attention to how it looks, how it sounds, how it feels, but you're also trying to figure out what was that beep on your phone. Do I need to check that text? Do I need to check that email? Sometimes just hearing a sound, just hearing a notification bell will take you out of the moment. Because even if you don't go check it, you're going to be thinking about it. Worrying about what you're going to do after practicing. Worrying about something that happened before you started to practice. These are all distractions. Now, something I've never touched on because I'm not very good at it. I don't even say I'm a novice. I have dabbled in this before, and I do believe there are benefits. But I have had a little bit of experience on this, and I might do more of this and talk about it someday, and that is meditation. Actually, I probably will never do a solo episode about meditation. I will probably get somebody to talk to who knows more about it. But meditation comes in a variety of forms. I've read a lot of books about it. I have applied some of it. I found it's especially helpful for when I want to get to sleep a little bit faster. But one of the most common uses of meditation, even like 3, 4, 5 minutes in the morning in a day, is to train yourself to pay attention to one thing and one thing only. And it might be your breath. But you're allowed to let your mind kind of wander, and you might settle in on like the way something feels on your right ear, and you just stay there for a while, and you don't come off of it until you're ready to move on to the next thing, and then you focus on that one thing at a time. It could be the way your stomach, your core is moving as you breathe, as it moves in and out and expands and contracts. So doing a singular focus, this type of thing can help, but you need to be able to singularly focus on whatever it is you're doing and not trying to do more than one thing at all. Multitasking does not help you get things to the subconscious part of your brain. Another thing is to have a sense of urgency. When a toddler is learning to walk, there's this almost desperate need to walk. They realize, I've been crawling around, that has helped up to now, but I cannot continue with life limited by crawling around. I have to get up on my feet, I have to get moving. And the intensity of that desire gets them there sooner than later. It's the same thing when they get a bicycle and there's no training wheels. First of all, there's a intensity, a bit of a desperation, some urgency that they don't fall down and hurt themselves. And as someone who has fallen off a bike many times while learning to ride it, and sometimes while being careless after I'd learned to ride it, This is something that I'm sure any of you could understand. When you're learning to drive a car, you understand that driving it incorrectly could cause damage to the car or yourself or someone else, whether it's minor or major, depending on how big and how fast you make that mistake. So it's probably hard when you're learning music to have that sense of urgency unless you set some stakes to yourself. If you tell yourself, I am not going to become a really good musician if I don't pay attention right now and get this just right and get to where I know it really well. I am not going to achieve my musical goals if I don't do the work and concentrate as intensely as I can. If I play this correctly 4 times, then I play it incorrectly 1 time, I'm not going to get into a sense of consistency that I need to be able to do it as fast as I can. So yes, you can create the sense of urgency by just reminding yourself, what are you trying to get to compared to where you are right now? The next thing you can do is deliberate repetition. Playing something the same way over and over. And again, engaging the 3 senses, hopefully one at a time as you're doing it. You can shift back and forth really quickly as you get more comfortable. But the more you repeat it, the more your subconscious observes it. And by the way, this is something I've said before. The subconscious of your brain is not the moral part of your brain. It doesn't determine what you meant to do. It observes what you did do. So this is why it's important to be very consistent, but also to make sure that you're doing it correctly. If you do it consistently, it's going to go to your subconscious eventually. But if you don't do it correctly, it's going to go to your subconscious incorrectly. But it won't get there at all if you don't do it the same way each time. So start up, make sure it's correct, make sure it's consistent, but the more you can do repetition with intense concentration, it could be a passage, it could be just a short little bit, but just something that you can pay attention to that will help you get it to your subconscious. Something else that you can do is to practice with many angles and variations. I'm just going to take a scale, for example, and again, I play piano, but most scale books will say to start at the bottom of the scale and go up and come back down and do that with a legato touch. Well, I recommend that you also do a staccato touch. And I also recommend that you start at the top of the scale, go down and come back up, and do each of those with a legato and a staccato touch. But also, scale books will say to do with a steady rhythm. It might say 8th notes, it might say 16ths. Why not try a dotted rhythm? Like 1 long note and 1 short note, or maybe 1 long note and 2 short notes. Or maybe a short note followed by a long note. Because when you explore things from different angles, your brain is getting to paint a picture. It's like when you see an object, like a tree, for example, and you only see it from one side and you paint that, well, you only have a picture of that side. But if you walk around several times and get to know the tree, and like what if you could lay on the ground and look up at it? And what if you could climb a tree nearby and see it from a higher perspective? The more angles you approach something, the greater you get to know it, and the more complete picture you send to your brain. And then the last thing that you can do, because subconscious is where you find your memory. So the last thing that I would recommend in this section right here is test your memory frequently. Even if you haven't been trying to memorize, as you're working on something, try to play it without looking at the sheet music. The more you can do that, the more you are getting things to your subconscious. Okay, so this episode is about the brain, and we did just talk about how to get things from the conscious part of your brain to the subconscious. We also talked about the various parts of the brain. But now let's talk about brain health. Things that you can do to probably improve your overall brain health, but definitely things that you can do to avoid deterioration of your brain health. Now, I'll say this up front. If you have a history of any kind of degenerative disease for your brain in your family, like Alzheimer's or anything else, I can't really speak to that. I don't know how much of anything I'm going to suggest will help. I have read some things that have said that these things might help, but there's not enough research to know for sure. Nothing I'm going to recommend would be of any harm. But if you're not at a risk of these types of degenerative diseases, these should help. So these are 6 things that you can do for brain health. The first one is to make a practice of reading challenging books. Challenging books can come in a lot of things. It can be on a challenging topic, so something you don't know that much about. So I read a lot of things on history, on science, in addition to music theory books and other topics that really require a lot of attention. But you can also read works of fiction where the language is a little bit more ornate, where there might be some words that are not familiar, and that you have to really kind of slow down a bit and pay attention. And then there are also works of fiction where maybe the language is or isn't that flowery, but the author is writing about more than one thing. So you're reading it not just for the story on the surface, but you're reading for what kind of subtext is going on, like what kind of analogies, what kind of metaphors are going on. So reading classic literature, reading like ancient epic poems, but also reading more contemporary literature that is regarded as a little bit more cerebral is a good practice. And if you love to read, you don't have to read just that. I enjoy plenty of pop genres like thrillers, mystery, horror, but make a practice of regularly reading something that challenges you in some way, to learn about something new, or to read in a way that just gets your brain to have to pay attention, to have to think. So a second thing that you can do for your brain health is kind of do an audit on your nutrition, how you're eating. Now, this is unfortunately a big controversial topic, so I'm not going to talk about whether or not you should eat meat, how many carbohydrates you should have, what kind of carbohydrates you should have, or anything like that. I don't think the diet that you choose ultimately really matters for this, other than just a few components that I hope we can all agree on. And that is, you want to try to shoot for a significantly high amount of protein, whatever source that comes from. You want to try to be getting as much fiber as you can. You want to try to limit or eliminate as added sugars as much as you can, and really try to reduce the amount of ultra-processed foods. These are all things that will make your brain and your body happier if you can make a habit of that. So a really good choice is just the more you can eat from the produce section, or if you eat meat from the butcher or from like a local farmer's market, the better. And the fewer things that you can eat that come out of bags, boxes, and cans, especially bags and boxes, that is also better. And this is something a lot of musicians don't take time to think about, especially if you have rehearsals and gigs and you can't have regular meal times. It's very easy to fall into fast food or to basically meal replacement things that are very highly processed and sometimes have a lot of sugar. And so you are not feeding your body and feeding your brain what it needs. So this is important enough that you should take time to resolve that issue of how you can eat well, even if you don't have time for like a traditional meal schedule. All right, the third thing, this is something that I am trying to do a better job of, and that is drinking more water. So if you're watching on video, I have a 32-ounce bottle right here, and my goal is to drink 2 of those a day. So that's at a minimum 64 ounces, and I try to be mindful that if I'm going to be outside a lot doing yard work or whatever, that I am accounting for that and trying to drink even more water. I even have a big 64-ounce bottle. Sometimes I switch to that. I just try to drink 1 of those in a day. But water helps your body to absorb fiber. It also, a lot of your body has water, including your brain. So just hydration helps everything. Now there is a point where you can overdo this, so don't listen to this and take the idea that you should just drink and drink and drink. If you start getting into triple digits as far as ounces, I suspect you might be overdoing it, but high double digits is something that you probably should be shooting for. A rule that I have heard before is if you'll take your weight or your goal weight, like let's just say that you're a little overweight, but you know what your ideal weight would be, divide that by 2 and change that to ounces. So like take your weight in pounds, divided by 2, change that to ounces, and that's kind of a good number to shoot for. Really important for brain health, and maybe the most important one on this list, to be honest, is sleep. And musicians, especially if you have gigs and rehearsals, this is a struggle. But most research says you should try your best to get between 7 and 8 hours of sleep per night. And at the very least, avoid regularly getting less than 6. Again, you can overdo it. If you're sleeping more than 9 and you are not in a cycle of life where that's normal, then that could be something that you need to see a doctor about. Another thing that really makes a big difference, and I know a lot of working musicians may just chuckle at this, and maybe even say to yourself, oh, that sounds nice. A consistent bedtime schedule. So a consistent time of going to bed and a consistent time of waking up, like within a half hour, if possible, if not within an hour of being the same each time. If you're like I was when I was in high school, I had to get up really early each weekday, but I made up for it by sleeping in really late on Saturdays. And I don't think I was able to do that on Sundays because I usually had a church piano job. But that liberty of sleeping in late, your body doesn't really enjoy that. It makes it harder on the other days to get up at a certain time. So whatever you decide is the right time to get up and the right time to go to bed, trying to get a 7-8 hours of sleep in. If you can do that as consistently as possible, the better. So if you regularly have gigs, you may want to try to adjust your schedule so you don't have to get up so early in the morning. And just whether you have a gig or not, go to bed at a time that would accommodate for when you do have a gig. That'd be the best advice that I could offer there. Something else to improve or maintain your brain health is the practice of writing. And I don't just mean music. Of course, that helps too if you compose. This is an advantage that you have. But even if you do compose, and whether you do or not, writing in a journal. And I do think there is something to taking the pen and writing it out on paper. But you may also write poems. You might write your biography, or write a story, write a novel. But the creative act of writing, this is something that really exercises your brain. And then the sixth thing that came to mind is doing puzzles like number puzzles and word puzzles, things that are problems that your brain has to solve. And the nice thing about writing is that it can be separate from your music. It can be things that you work on just to work on it, just to improve this wonderful muscle of your brain. So what are your thoughts? What is something that I have overlooked? And would you be willing to share it with your own voice? You can do that by going to speakpipe.com/musician toolkit. Or if you just want to tell me by writing it down, by typing it out, you can go to my website at davidlanemusic.com. You'll see the contact form right on the homepage. If you watch this on YouTube, I hope that you'll subscribe if you haven't already, and click the thumbs up on this video to help out the algorithm and to help other people find it. And whether you're doing that or listening on the podcast, if you'll just share this with someone who might find this helpful, that will really help this podcast to find more listeners who would enjoy the topics here. So that's going to wrap it up for episode number 119. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.